A pall of dust hangs over the ruins of Skopje, like a blanket thrown over a battered corpse, to protect the mutilated city from the gaze of casual passers-by on the highway to Greece. Denison Rusinov. With current events focusing on one main event at this moment, the series of devastating earthquakes in Afghanistan this month has been relegated to back-page news. Current casualty counts are more than 2,400 people, 90% of whom are women and children due to the Taliban restrictions on women in public. Entire villages have collapsed, an event made more likely by the mud brick construction of these areas, which does help regulate heat very well, but becomes brittle and completely crumbles, unable to withstand the shaking of the earth. And in the face of a sharp drop in international aid after the Taliban takeover, thousands are facing a brutal winter without shelter. Also possible is that the world may find itself somewhat weary of what seems like an endless parade of catastrophic earthquakes this year. Morocco's September earthquake caused more than 2,900 dead and up to 500,000 people displaced. In February, a 7.8 earthquake caused enormous damage in Turkey and Syria. The natural disasters seem to just keep coming, and other world events are now taking precedence. But all of this is current events, and From Sarajevo to Red Africa specializes in history. History, however, gives us definite examples of world response to other catastrophic earthquakes, including what happened in Skopje, in what was then Yugoslavia, on July 26, 1963. The population of Skopje awoke on the morning of July 26, 1963 at 5:17 a.m. to about 20 seconds of violent shaking. Later, the Secretary of Information of the Yugoslav Socialist Republic of Macedonia would recount that the initial reaction of he and his wife, which was to argue over whether their family would be safer running out into the streets or staying home in their obviously teetering apartment. It was an argument that was repeated throughout the city, and like most other families, the decision was made to flee. As they huddled together outside, they began to strategize and attempt to build up courage to re-enter their home and grab valuables and essentials. Finally, the man's father-in-law dashed in and returned with a pair of sunglasses and 4 mismatched shoes. The story was related to a Western journalist merely 10 days after the catastrophic earthquake, and Macedonians who overheard it laughed appreciatively after it was told, then related their own experiences with post-earthquake absurdity to more laughter. This form of dark humor in the face of tragedy being a hallmark of former Yugoslav states, and indeed the Slavic world in general, it became a symbol of the Macedonian ability to overcome tragedy on the world stage. And this, of course, made the rest of the world, fresh off the terror of the Cuban Missile Crisis and the brink of nuclear war, want to jump in and help the plucky Yugoslavs. The needs of SR Macedonia were immense. 80% of the city was completely destroyed, although the death toll was less than initially expected at just under 1,100 people. 3,000 to 4,000 people were wounded, and about 200,000 were immediately homeless. The first Western journalist on the scene, David Binder of the New York Times, reported that the city looked like Warsaw after its subjection to the Nazi destruction after the Warsaw Uprising. It was an assessment that the Macedonians themselves tended to agree with in their approach to dealing with the situation. It's not unlike things were during the war, they would say often to other Westerners. Yugoslav army teams were on site within 15 minutes after the earthquake ended. Immediately, nations around the world began strategizing on how and which aid to send to the nation that was at the head of the Third World Movement. Within 3 days, Americans were on the ground and helping to build tent cities and prefabricated buildings, and also erected a field hospital. Within 7 days, the Soviets had also arrived with heavy equipment to help clear the rubble. In the end, all that would be left of the destruction was the ruined train station with its clock permanently stopped at 5:17, the moment disaster struck. In total, nearly 80 nations would contribute to both the immediate relief efforts and rebuilding of Skopje, an enormous and truly international effort. And it was necessary help. The damage to the city was estimated at $1 billion. As the Yugoslav president, Josip Broz Tito, said in an address, "Skopje was struck by an unseen catastrophe, but we will rebuild it again. With the help of our entire community, it will become our pride and a symbol of fraternity and unity, of Yugoslav and of global solidarity." Tito's statement was not mere posturing. Yugoslavia did welcome foreign aid. This was also one of the first natural disasters to happen in the age of television. And Tito was incredibly savvy at public relations. Lest anyone forget, he managed to convince mega movie star Richard Burton to play the role of Tito in the Yugoslav film Battle of Sutjeska. While Burton was at the peak of his career, and despite the seemingly obvious handicap of not speaking the language. The world was looking for a feel-good story, a way to participate in world events that did not carry the possibility of the end of the world in nuclear annihilation. And Skopje came just in time. To add to the feel-good nature of the international community, there was remarkably little looting in this city, even though it was largely destroyed. Only 17 looters were caught by the Yugoslav police troops, who were quickly dispatched from all of the Yugoslav republics within the first week, and had an overwhelming presence throughout Skopje. These people, the world seemed to think, deserve our help. Of course, the large police presence and the fact that more than 80 known criminals were placed on preventative arrest probably had something to do with the lack of known looting. But the community was also effective at policing itself. In one instance, Yugoslav police intervened not to catch a looter, but to save him from the crowd that had caught him in the act and was attempting to string the man up. Even with the intervention of police, the man was so beaten up that he had to spend quite a bit of time in the hospital. As rebuilding commenced, a revolution took place in the architecture of Skopje. Previous earthquake standards were nowhere near effective enough, obviously. And with the help of the UN, the Institute of Earthquake Engineering and Engineering Seismology was established. This led to the creation of better building codes and standards for the earthquake-prone area. The Japanese were also heavily involved in the architectural efforts of rebuilding due to their own vast experience with earthquakes. When an international competition was held for city plans, 60% of the allocated resources were given to a Japanese team led by the designer of the Hiroshima Peace Memorial, and the remaining 40% to a Croatian firm. The plan called for by the Japanese team was a huge undertaking, requiring even areas that had survived the earthquake to be torn down and rebuilt in brutalist styles. The modern appearance appealed to a world hoping to look toward a brighter future. As a UN expert on urban planning stated, The world now expects that the new Skopje will become a model city, but not for the present, but for the future. For the world's sake, Skopje has to be not just a city to live in, but also a monument to the hope of a better world. It was the call to tear down remaining historic areas of the city that caused issues, although there were many who were on board with the idea of a completely fresh start for Skopje. Others objected to the erasure of the past heritage. In particular, the old bazaar neighborhood, with its Ottoman heritage and in existence from the 12th century, became a flashpoint. The Macedonian architect Mimosa Nestorova Tomic had nearly single-handedly spearheaded the preservation effort, and she succeeded. The old bazaar remains one of Skopje's most popular areas today. Even one of SR Macedonia's traditional antagonists jump in to help. The Universalna Sala, or Universal Hall, was built almost exactly to the plans of the state circus building in Sofia, with much of it being prefabricated in Bulgaria and assembled in Skopje. To this day, the hall, although now derelict and closed to the public, bears a dedication plaque that reads, "This Universal Performance Hall was erected with the help of the citizens, humanitarian organizations, and governments of Afghanistan, Australia, Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Guinea, Iran, Iraq, Indonesia, Israel, Jordan, Yemen, Japan, Cambodia, Cuba, Canada, Cyprus, Lebanon, Liberia, Luxembourg, Mali, Mongolia, Morocco, Monaco, Nigeria, New Zealand, Pakistan, Sudan, Senegal, Syria, Turkey, Tunisia, Uruguay, Ceylon, and Chile, as well as foreign tourists of the day of the disaster who found themselves in Yugoslavia. The building will remain as a permanent symbol of the international human solidarity shown during the reconstruction of Skopje after the catastrophic earthquake of July 1963. Not listed on the plaque, despite doing the lion's share of the work and donation on this building, is Bulgaria. It seems rather unlikely to have been a mere oversight. The Skopje earthquake happened at the height of the Cold War, and it's probably no surprise that even the international rescue and rebuild effort would be measured by those in the East and the West. While American officials would privately claim that the Western aid far outstripped that of the East, and complain that Yugoslavia made them seem equal in contributions, the East could definitely boast that the entire rebuilding project was being overseen by the Polish architect Adolf Syborowski. And, as far as bloc leaders were concerned, it was Soviet Premier Khrushchev that visited the ruins of Skopje at the end of August in 1963, not the American President Kennedy. Several news clips of Tito and Khrushchev visiting the ruins were televised across the world, giving the impression of closer and friendly relations between the two. But what may have been missed by the casual observer was that during the visit, which made its way through nearly all of Yugoslavia, most of the places that Khrushchev was taken to visit were factories with Western parts, areas in Skopje of Western aid, and places in Croatia full of Western tourists. Even in the midst of a national crisis, Tito managed to leave no doubt as to his maneuvering between the two superpowers. This was heavily underlined when a Soviet journalist asked Khrushchev about the difference in living standards between Yugoslavia, which again had just suffered a devastating earthquake, and the Soviet Union. The question was not at all received well. The Skopje earthquake in 1963, which resulted in the motto "the City of International Solidarity," stands in stark contrast to the response to the most recent earthquakes in Afghanistan. Part of this is definitely due to events currently unfolding at the same time, but there's more to it than that. While the Skopje earthquake took place during the first age of television, allowing people to see the damage firsthand from their own homes, current world crises unfold in the age of social media, and not as many Afghans are posting their scenes of destruction. The world of July 1963 had also just avoided nuclear war by the skin of its teeth and was anxious to reaffirm its humanity through positive endeavors. The result was the rebuilding of the city of Skopje, an international effort unparalleled in history. But, as always, our short discussion should just be a starting point. There's far more to be read and understood about the history of the Cold War, the Third World, and the brutalist architecture and art movement than we've discussed today. Please read more, go back further, and for goodness sake, make sure you can find these places on a map.